In the morning of day 3, we begin Module 5, testing. So at this point, we've got our governance in place. We know our building blocks. We've done our initial instance configuration. We've done some development. We've added automation to it. Now we've really got to test things. So we look at the context of testing within an implementation project. When do we test? We're not going into a lot of the methodology pieces, but we do have to explain that context. We then will go into ServiceNow testing capabilities before diving deep into the automated test framework. You'll notice I've got an activity and I've removed one of our labs associated with ATF. So before we had a lab to create a custom test step. I've removed that because they've incorporated negative testing into the application already in a native format. So it was a little bit my lab did a little bit more than they have, but still it was fairly redundant and I didn't want to uh, do that too much. Plus at this point, we're on day 3. So yeah, I figured we'd leave it there. So we begin with testing goals and planning. What role does testing play? Why do we test? Same stuff as we had before, motherhood and apple pie. We also want to stress that our goals for testing from day 1, we're not looking at having all tests passed. We can have just tests defined, tests, 60% there. When do we test? Throughout the entire life cycle. So our tests can be whiteboard tests. It can be having things just being able to execute end to end. So we've kind of highlighted some of the potential goals and types of testing that we do throughout each phase of our deployment and with each iteration of our development process. We then go into our testing capabilities. And this is just kind of a rejig of what we had before. We've got the automated test framework. We've also got our PPM suite test management. It's essentially just tracking testing efforts. And then I've got coordinated testing with ServiceNow. So again, here with load testing and penetration testing, we need to know when something is a test versus an attack. So that's kind of the terminology that I hit on for that. So we could talk about those types of things in here. And then we've got our sorting exercise. Had this before, hopefully it's a little bit more cleaned up. You'll be able to see the ones with shadows go for both. I couldn't get rid of that. So we want to select the most appropriate capability for each type of test. Some may be both. Regression testing, that's what ATF was built for. Compatibility testing, especially with different browsers. Again, here, ATF custom built for that type of stuff. Functionality tests, there may be things that we can't automate or can't foresee. So that may be something we can automate part of that, but we also want users to test functionality for us as well, and we can track those results in test management. Usability, definitely, it's humans that are using our system, so usability goes into test management. Acceptance, again, it's humans that need to accept these things. Integration, we can do some of that with ATF. We can test inbound integrations through automated tests. We can trigger outbound integrations in ATF and then kind of monitor, wait for the result, and assess that. However, we can't really test that traffic over the wire or some of the security or even have visibility to the third-party application that we're integrating with. So there's a component that we can handle in ATF and a component that has to be manually tested or tested with external testing tools and tracked for us. Same type of thing with security. We can test those things that we anticipate and know about that are standard, but we can't anticipate all the different ways that security will need to be tested. Or sorry, I should say, and if we're using encryption, we can't test that through the ATF. So we need humans in the mix or external testing tools to help with security testing. Load and penetration testing, again here, we need to coordinate that with ServiceNow. So here's the answer guide. I'll try to post that answer guide in the student knowledge base as well. Finally, getting into the automated test framework in more detail. Again, here's why it was created, what the goals are, general process. We do not want to try to test everything. The exercise begins with what is your business critical functionality that you're trying to support per process or application. Identify those things, develop tests for it, package them into suites, schedule it, and monitor from there. We can go into a demo, but make sure that you hit on these things. So we can look at the user interface, we can look at the test steps. This is very reminiscent of what we saw in Studio with Create Application File. Very well organized. You can see in the slide notes that some of these will require or they'll simulate users using the system, and some of them will just execute server side. So like to do a server query, a record query, you don't need a UI for that, nor do you need that for a REST step in there. But show these things. These are called step configuration categories. We've got step configurations. You can create your own steps as well. Then in the example that I have, this is one that uses a lot of UI steps. It's the basic record producer. Execute this in your instructor instance. Demonstrate this because it will show, you can walk through each of the steps, look at the execution order, look at how the test runner opens up in a new browser window. And then once it finishes, it goes into kind of a standby mode. And you need to flip back over to that initial main ServiceNow tab. Some students miss that, and instructors aren't really pointing that out consistently. So definitely do that in this example here. We could talk about the test runners. You may have these running on virtual machines. I'm showing in the screenshot that I've got a Chrome test runner running and a Firefox, and we can schedule our tests to be run on different browsers. That's just for the UI related ones. And then we can also take a look at what the results look like. This should not be a surprise to students at this point in the course. We've got ATF tests for every single lab in the course, so they should be fairly familiar with this, but you can point out some of the key things about this. Then we're just setting them loose in here. With creating your first test step. This is exactly the same exercise that we had in Kingston. There is one thing that I still do need to really dig into, and I've pointed it out with this enforced security. I'll do a page swap when I fix this and figure out what the heck is wrong with this. This test only passes if we have enforced security equals false. It's a temporary thing. I'm sorry. I'm trying to figure out what caused this. But hopefully it won't last that long. I just need to dig into it quite a bit. Schedule test suite results. We can't really do this, so I've captured this in a screenshot. You can see trend information when things started failing or passing, and just kind of have this run on a nightly basis on a sub-production instance. This email is awesome. So definitely kind of promote this as well. One other thing to note about the automated test framework is that I'm not sure with London, but definitely for Madrid, all of our BUs are going to try to start packaging standard automated test framework tests. So if you are licensed for ITSM, for example, you will have a suite of tests that test incident management, change management, problem management, etc. You will still have to go in there, clone the test, tweak them because they'll all be relying on demo data, but you'll have a starting point, full suite of regression tests for every application that we provide or that we offer. It'll take a few releases to get that maturity level there and make sure that all of them have it, but that's the direction that we're going in. A little bit of motherhood and apple pie with good practices here. including step 1 should always be to impersonate an appropriate test user. So we can talk about that, see what other guidance students have, and then we get into our exercise to create an ATF test plan. There is a dependency on this one to the Flow Designer lab. That wraps up our testing module. We've got Further Your Learning with some developer portal classes. Try to go through the process, identify essential functionality, develop test plans for each. And then we also have a Tech Now webinar that was concentrated solely on the automated test framework. This was probably the Kingston release, but it still hits the highlights. That wraps up testing.